She was 21 when she first stepped off the plane into Dubai's furnace heat, her passport still stiff from the consulate stamp, her hands trembling against the handle of a second-hand suitcase. Gemma Velasco had been told this was her chance. A contract as a domestic worker in the home of Sheikh Walid Al-Ruwais, a man whose name carried the weight of towers and contracts, whose photographs appeared in glossy magazines and whose wife, Sheikha Hanifa, was a patroness of hospitals, schools, and gala halls strung with crystal lights. To Gemma, the offer had seemed like salvation. Her village in the Philippines had prepared her for little more than hard labor, and the promise of remittances in dirhams felt like a doorway to survival. She believed she was leaving behind sweat, mud, and the stale air of poverty for something brighter. She did not know that the brightness of gold could suffocate just as easily as it dazzled. The house was not a house but a palace dressed as one. Marble floors stretched in patterns of cream and onyx, chandeliers hung like frozen fireworks, and archways opened into rooms that seemed too perfect to be lived in. The servants' quarters, where Gemma was led, were small, windowless cells at the edge of the estate, tucked behind a courtyard of lemon trees that no one but the staff tended. The hierarchy was clear. Sheikha Hanifa sat at the pinnacle, untouchable, her voice soft but edged with command. Beneath her, senior staff who had been in the household for decades. At the bottom, Gemma, 21, untested, her Tagalog accent still strong when she whispered in English. Her duties began at dawn and ended at midnight. She scrubbed the polished banisters until her knuckles ached, polished chandeliers until her arms trembled from holding the cloth aloft, pressed linens until they were flat as glass. She was not noticed, not at first, just another young woman in uniform, one of many who bent their heads when guests passed through. But she felt his gaze before she ever dared to meet it. Sheikh Walid, tall, impeccably groomed, with eyes that measured everything he touched. He saw her while she cleaned, while she poured tea, while she bent to sweep. At first it was nothing. A pause in the hallway, a lingering glance when he passed the grand staircase. Then it was words, not commands, but questions. What is your name? How long have you been here? His tone was casual, his smile small, but his attention was dangerous. Gemma had seen men look before, in markets, on jeepneys, but this was different. This was not a glance she could avoid. When he lingered outside the servants' quarters one night, his silhouette filling the doorway, she felt her chest tighten. He asked her if she was lonely, if she missed home. His voice was low, measured, and yet there was a hunger behind it. She turned away, said nothing, but the silence did not break the spell. It deepened it. The days that followed brought small favors, extra breaks, an envelope slipped quietly into her hand, clothing far too fine for a maid folded neatly on her bed. She tried to refuse, once, trembling, but his smile carried a warning. The affair began in shadows, but shadows in that house could not stay hidden forever. He told her she was different, that she carried a fire no jewel of Hanifa's majlis could ever match. Gemma wanted to believe him, but her fear burned hotter. She demanded what no servant dared to ask. If he wanted her, she said, he must give her his name. Not just gifts, not just whispers in the dark, but the thing that separated concubines from wives, secrets from queens. He laughed at first, the idea absurd. She repeated it, her voice breaking, her fists clenched. If you want me, I want your name. I want the life she has. It should have ended there, with anger or dismissal. But Walid surprised even himself. Away from the gilded halls, away from Hanifa's orbit, he arranged a ceremony. A rented apartment in Dara, a hired cleric, a paper signed in haste. No palace witnesses, no royal seal. But to Gemma it was real. She was no longer the maid polishing chandeliers. She was wife, even if secret. She carried the paper close to her chest like a relic. Months turned into years, and from their secret union came a daughter, her eyes wide like Gemma's, her smile carrying the crooked charm of her father. For Gemma, the birth was proof that she was not disposable, that her claim was real. She pressed him harder. Recognition, registration, a future for the child that would not be erased. Walid's fear only grew sharper. He visited her in secret apartments, held the baby at night, kissed her forehead, but each act of tenderness was framed with refusal. Not yet, not now. It would destroy everything. She told herself it was temporary, that one day he would bring her into the palace, let her sit where Hanifa sat, let their daughter walk through doors without shame. But each time he left, returning to the mansion with his official wife, Gemma felt the walls of her hidden rooms close tighter. She watched the skyline from the balcony of her secret flat, the towers glittering like polished lies, and wondered how long a secret could live before it poisoned them all. By the time the child could walk, the paper of their marriage had already begun to curl at the edges, hidden in a drawer, folded and unfolded too many times. Gemma's heart burned with both love and fury. She had everything and nothing: his promises, his daughter, his arms in the dark, but never his name in the light. And far above, in towers that gleamed against the desert sky, the city pretended perfection. But perfection in Dubai was never truth. It was a mask, and behind that mask, secrets festered. Secrets like hers. Secrets that one day someone else would uncover. Gemma's life shifted but never quite transformed. The maid's uniform was gone, replaced by dresses Walid brought her from boutiques along Sheikh Zayed Road, silks that whispered against her skin, shoes with heels too high for the tiled floors of her small flat. Yet despite the wardrobe, despite the title whispered in private wife, her role remained that of a hidden woman. She still cooked the meals, ironed her own linens, scrubbed the kitchen counters, but now it was not for a household of dozens. It was for him and for their daughter, a family that existed only in shadows. She folded laundry as though she were still in the servant's wing, though her hands now pressed the collars of shirts stitched with his initials. At night, when she rocked the child to sleep, she told herself this was progress, a stepping stone. But in her heart she wanted more. She wanted to walk into the palace not as a maid, not as a ghost, but as Sheikha Gemma, seated beside him where the world could see. Walid avoided that truth. His visits were timed and calculated. He arrived after dusk in tinted cars, wearing plain suits that could blend into anonymity. He locked the doors, kissed the child, rested briefly in Gemma's arms, and left before dawn. Each visit carried a weight of affection, but also a stench of fear. He was a man built on appearances, on contracts inked with rival emirs, on a reputation so carefully constructed that one rumor could undo it all. A Filipina maid turned wife, a child born outside the lines of official recognition. These were not just personal risks. They were daggers aimed at the heart of his empire. Gemma felt the dodge each time she pressed him. "Register me. Let her inherit. Let her carry your name." He would soften his voice, stroke her hair, and whisper, "Soon, when the timing is right, when the pressure is less." But the timing was never right. The pressure never lifted. His soon stretched like a thread that never snapped but cut her hands each time she pulled. Meanwhile, the other woman, Hanifa, was everywhere. Gemma could not escape her presence. The Sheikah's face adorned magazines on salon tables, photographs from charity galas, glossy spreads of her draped in gowns, her wrists jeweled with heritage diamonds. She spoke at conferences on education, smiled beside international delegates, and presided over halls glittering with gold. Walid at her side, the image of marital unity. Every photograph was a knife turned slowly in Gemma's chest. She would sit in her hidden flat with a magazine in her lap, her fingers pressing so hard against the page that the ink smudged. She compared the images to her own life, feeding a toddler oatmeal in a cramped kitchen, washing bottles at midnight, watching from a window while the towers of Dubai shimmered like a city that refused to acknowledge her. Her world became a series of silences. She could not speak to neighbors. They believed she was simply a tenant with a generous benefactor. She could not call her family. What could she say? That she had become a wife in secret, that her daughter was both legitimate and illegitimate at once? So she turned inward. She began writing letters not to post, but to release. Pages filled with confessions, questions, accusations. "Why am I hidden? Why do you fear me? I gave you everything: my youth, my body, my child. What am I to you? A secret? A shame?" She folded these letters and kept them in a box beneath her bed, as though one day he might read them and finally answer. But letters were not enough. The tension grew like a storm pressing against walls too thin to hold. One evening, as Walid prepared to leave, she confronted him. The marriage certificate lay between them on the table, edges worn from years of folding and unfolding. Gemma picked it up, her hands trembling, and ripped it once, then again, until it was jagged pieces scattered like snow across the glass. Walid froze, his jaw tight, his hand hovering in midair. She shouted then, not in whispers, not in pleading, but in raw fury. "Do you see what you make me? A ghost wife, a hidden womb. You feed me lies and call them love. Walid's face hardened. He told her to be patient, that she did not understand the stakes. He gathered the scraps of paper as if they were more fragile than the woman before him. His voice rose, for once not in anger but in desperation. Do you think I can survive if they know? Do you think I can keep you safe if the world sees what we are? He left in silence after that, but the echo of her words clung to the walls. When the door shut, Gemma collapsed to the floor, her daughter stirring in the other room. The child would never understand why her father was there one day and gone the next, why he smiled in photographs beside another woman but kissed her cheek in secret. Gemma held her daughter close and whispered the truth she could not shout. You are his blood. You deserve his name. From the balcony, she stared at the city glittering in the night. Each tower seemed to mock her. They rose higher with every year, symbols of prosperity, of ambition, of perfection. But beneath the gleaming facades, secrets rotted. She knew hers was not the only story hidden in rented apartments, but she also knew hers was the one that could shatter everything Walid had built. Love had once felt like a refuge. Now it felt like a cage lined with gold, and every day, the bars grew thicker. In the distance, a red beacon blinked from the top of a skyscraper. It pulsed in rhythm with her anger, her longing, her despair. She pressed her forehead against the glass and closed her eyes. Something had to break, and deep inside, she knew it would not be her alone. Farid Al-Mutawa did not stumble upon secrets by chance. He cultivated them. In a city where silence was often more valuable than oil, he had built his fortune on knowing what was hidden and naming the price of keeping it quiet. For years he had walked beside Walid Al-Ruwais, smiling in photographs, signing contracts in mirrored halls, raising toasts at banquets where power traded hands in whispers. To outsiders they were brothers in ambition, two pillars propping up the skyline. But Farid was no brother. He was a predator who knew that even palaces had weak foundations, and he had finally found the crack he had been waiting for. It came to him in the form of paperwork, mundane, almost laughably so. A clerk in Dara noticed a lease tied to one of Walid's subsidiaries. The apartment was not in Walid's name, but the signature authorizing the payment bore the unmistakable weight of his hand. Curious, the clerk dug deeper and discovered school fees routed through a charitable arm that only seemed to sponsor one child. There were murmurs of a quiet ceremony conducted by a neighborhood cleric for a man who arrived with cash and left with no witnesses. Piece by piece, the puzzle assembled itself until Farid saw the full picture. A Filipina domestic worker elevated to secret wife, a child hidden away in the shadows of Dubai's glittering towers. It was not just gossip, it was leverage. Farid waited until the secret had ripened. He confirmed the details, secured a copy of the marriage certificate, traced the financial trail that supported Gemma Velasco and her daughter. Only when the evidence lay neatly in his files did he make his move. Timing, for men like Farid, was everything. The confrontation took place in Walid's penthouse, a space designed to intimidate. From the marble foyer to the chandelier that dripped crystals like frozen rain, the apartment was meant to remind anyone who entered that its owner stood above the city he surveyed. But that evening, the grandeur only highlighted how fragile Walid had become. The glass walls opened onto a skyline that glittered with confidence, while inside, the air carried the weight of fear. Gemma was already there. She had come with the fragments of her torn marriage certificate pressed into an envelope, determined to demand what she had been denied for years. The daughter she had born was growing, asking questions that could no longer be deflected with lullabies. She wanted legitimacy. She wanted recognition. She wanted Walid's name written in a place where the world could see it. The envelope in her hands was proof of her patience unraveling. Farid entered without ceremony, his steps measured, his expression cool. He carried a folder tucked neatly under his arm, the kind of folder that did not need to be opened for its threat to be understood. Walid froze, his phone still in his hand from the call he had been pretending to finish. The room seemed to shrink around the three of them, the man who had everything to lose, the woman who had nothing left to wait for, and the partner who saw both as pieces to be moved on a board. What Farid laid before them was simple. He had the certificate. He had proof of the daughter. He had the means to reveal what Walid had buried. He did not need to shout. The evidence spoke louder than threats. The terms were clear. Hand over half of the contracts, the empire they had built together, or watch it collapse under the weight of scandal. Walid's terror showed not in his words but in the stillness of his body. His hand tightened on the back of a chair until the knuckles blanched. His eyes darted toward the window as if the towers outside might offer an escape. He pictured the consequences with brutal clarity. Rivals seizing the opportunity to destroy him, courts dragging his name through proceedings designed to humiliate, Hanifa turning her poise into a weapon sharper than any blade. His empire was not made of steel and glass. It was made of reputation, and reputation could shatter in an instant. Gemma's fury was different. She stood straighter, the envelope clutched to her chest like a shield. Her silence was heavier than any outburst. She did not need to shout her question. It hung in the air, pressing down on Walid until he nearly buckled under it. "Why do you hide me? Why do you hide her?" The triangle locked in place. Walid cornered, Gemma burning with betrayal, Farid watching with the cold satisfaction of a man who had engineered the perfect trap. The room pulsed with tension. The chandelier swayed slightly in the current from the air conditioning, its prisms scattering fractured light across the marble floor. Each reflection seemed to multiply their faces, 3 versions of themselves caught in glass, each more distorted than the last. Farid leaned back in one of the leather chairs, not to rest but to claim the space as his own. Walid paced, his polished shoes leaving faint scuffs that would later be buffed away by staff who would never know the history made there. Gemma remained near the window, her reflection framed against the skyline, her presence both fragile and immovable. Minutes stretched. Walid's refusal came in the form of silence, his eyes locked on the folder, but his hands refusing to touch it. Farid pressed, not with volume but with inevitability, reminding him of what exposure would mean. Gemma's breathing grew sharper, her chest rising and falling in rhythm with her fury. She had dreamed of recognition. Instead she was being used as a weapon in a war between men. The insult cut deeper than the threat. The skyline outside glittered with indifference. Towers rose in their perfect symmetry, their facades reflecting a city that cared nothing for secrets bleeding open in a penthouse. Down below, traffic surged, restaurants buzzed, fountains danced to music. Life carried on untouched, unaware. Inside, however, everything had shifted. Walid finally spoke, but his words carried no weight. They were stalling tactics, vague promises of compromise, muttered insistences that the matter could be resolved discreetly. Farid did not move. Gemma did not blink. The trap was set, and the only way out was through. By the time Farid stood to leave, the room was thick with the residue of unspoken war. He had not shouted, had not struck, had not even raised his voice. He had simply laid the truth bare and demanded his price. Walid had refused, but refusal meant nothing. It only meant the clock had started. Gemma's eyes followed Farid to the door, her face pale but resolute. She knew that whatever happened next would no longer be about promises. It would be about survival. When the door closed behind him, the silence was almost unbearable. Walid sagged against the table, his empire collapsing in his mind even as the towers outside stood tall. Gemma turned from the window, clutching the fragments of their marriage, and for the first time in years, she felt something sharper than longing. She felt the edge of war cutting into her life, and she knew there would be no turning back. Walid thought the night had ended when the door closed behind Farid. For a brief moment, the penthouse exhaled into silence, the chandelier humming faintly above, the skyline beyond the glass unbroken. But minutes later, the sound of the elevator returning shattered that illusion. The doors opened, and Farid stepped back inside, his jacket loosened, his eyes sharper, more dangerous. He hadn't come for tomorrow's answer. He wanted it tonight. The penthouse at night was a temple to glass and silence. Chandeliers dripped their crystals in frozen arcs above, refracting light across mirrored walls that made the room seem endless. From the floor-to-ceiling windows, the skyline stretched like a jeweled crown, towers shimmering against the desert night, each one reflecting a perfection that did not exist inside. The marble floor was polished to such brilliance that it caught their outlines in ghostly reflection, 3 figures bound together by a secret that had grown too sharp to contain. Walid stood by the desk, his hands trembling against its edge, papers scattered across the surface like broken wings. Farid lingered near the gold railing, calm as ever, his jacket unbuttoned, his eyes narrowed in the pleasure of victory deferred. Gemma held the torn fragments of the marriage certificate in her hand, her knuckles white, her chest heaving with a fury that had outgrown patience. The room was no longer just a penthouse, it was a stage built for collapse. The silence cracked first with Walid's movement. He crossed the space in 2 strides, seized Gemma by the shoulders, and pressed his hand against her mouth. His grip was desperate, not cruel, the gesture of a man trying to halt words before they became weapons. Her muffled cries echoed against his palm, her eyes wild with betrayal. Farid laughed quietly, his voice curling like smoke. "Kill her," he said softly, "and you bury yourself twice, once with her, once with the child." The taunt seared through Walid's composure. His hand slipped from Gemma's mouth as if burned. She stumbled backward, fury igniting her. Her hand reached blindly for the nearest object, a crystal glass on the side table. She hurled it to the floor, where it shattered in a ringing explosion. The shards glittered across the marble like tiny knives. "I will go myself," she screamed, her voice ragged. "I will walk into the courts, into the streets, and I will show them your name." The words tore through Walid, louder than gunfire. He lunged toward the desk, yanking open a drawer that stuck for half a second before sliding free. From its depths he pulled a pistol, sleek and black, a relic of his private need for control. Farid moved instantly, crossing the room with surprising speed, his hand closing over Walid's wrist. The struggle began without sound. 2 men locked in a silent war, teeth clenched, muscles straining, the weapon twisting between them. The chandelier above swayed from the force of their collision, casting fractured light across their bodies as they slammed against the desk, scattering pens and papers to the floor. The polished surface echoed with the scrape of shoes, the dull thud of fists against wood. Their reflections on the mirrored wall multiplied the violence, a dozen men fighting, a dozen pistols shifting from one hand to the other. Gemma stood frozen for a moment, the fragments of her marriage paper still clutched in her hand. She could not bear the sight, the man who had promised her love and the man who had threatened her existence wrestling like animals over the instrument of her fate. She screamed again, the sound high and raw, and rushed forward. Her hand brushed the desk, searching for balance, finding instead one of the larger shards of crystal glass. It cut her palm, blood blooming instantly, but she did not release it. She held the shard like a dagger, her voice breaking as she begged them to stop. Neither man heard her. The pistol scraped against the marble, firing once into the ceiling with a deafening crack that shook the air and sent dust raining from the chandelier. Walid pressed Farid against the desk, but Farid twisted, slamming his shoulder into Walid's chest. The gun slipped between them, barrel swinging wildly, each breath a trigger waiting to be pulled. Gemma stepped forward, her arm outstretched, the shard trembling in her hand. She tried to wedge herself between them, her voice hoarse. For a moment, the chaos slowed, as if the air itself held still. Then the shot rang out. She gasped, staggered, her body jerking as the bullet tore through her. The papers fell from her hand, fluttering to the floor like broken feathers. She collapsed to her knees, the shard still clutched in her palm, blood pooling beneath her. Walid's scream was strangled, animal, the sound of a man watching his sins take flesh. Farid froze only for a second, shock flashing across his features, before rage returned sharper than before. He shoved Walid backward, seized the gun, and raised it. But Walid lunged again, driving his weight forward, his hand catching Farid's wrist and wrenching it sideways. The shot fired into Farid's chest, the force sending him staggering against the gold railing. His body bent awkwardly, then slid down until he lay crumpled, blood spreading across his shirt in a dark bloom. His eyes stared at the chandelier above, still swaying faintly, as if mocking his fall. Walid turned, trembling, his breath ragged, his gaze falling on Gemma. She lay curled on the marble, the fragments of their marriage certificate stained crimson where they touched her skin. Her eyes fluttered once, then stilled, her lips forming words he could not hear. He staggered toward her, but his foot slipped on blood, and he fell to one knee. The shard she had clutched slipped free, spinning once across the floor before lodging upright in the space between them. His hand reached for her, trembling, but as he leaned forward, his other hand pressed against his abdomen. He looked down and saw red soaking through his shirt, the glass shard buried deep from where she had swung in panic before collapsing. His strength drained as quickly as the blood that stained his clothes. He fell backward, eyes locked on the chandelier above. its light fractured into 1,000 shards, each one reflecting his failure. The marble beneath him was slick, transformed into a mirror of blood. It captured all of them in its reflection. Gemma's still form, Farid's collapsed body against the railing, and Walid himself, sprawled beneath the swaying chandelier. Outside the glass walls, the towers glittered, pristine, indifferent, reflecting perfection, while inside, truth lay rotting. The penthouse was silent again, save for the faint hum of the air conditioning and the creak of the chandelier. 3 lives ended, their secrets spilled across marble meant to display only wealth and elegance. In the mirrored walls, their deaths multiplied endlessly, a grotesque tableau of betrayal, greed, and love gone rancid. And far beyond the glass, the city sparkled on, as if nothing had happened at all. The first to hear it were the guards posted by the elevators. A sharp crack, then another, echoing through marble and glass. For a moment they hesitated, unsure if the noise was renovation work from a neighboring floor or something more. But when the chandelier above the lobby shivered faintly, dust drifting from its crystals, they rushed to the private lift. By the time they forced open the doors to Sheikh Walid's penthouse, silence had already reclaimed the space. 3 bodies lay scattered like discarded pieces of a puzzle that no one wanted to solve. Gemma on the floor, her blood pooling around the fragments of paper she had clutched until the end. Farid collapsed against the railing, his shirt darkened, eyes wide at the ceiling. And Walid himself, sprawled beneath the swaying chandelier, the marble beneath him turned crimson. The opulence of the room had not changed, the mirrored walls, the skyline gleaming just beyond the glass, but everything inside had been undone. Within minutes, men in plain clothes arrived. Not paramedics, not first responders, but figures trained to move quickly, silently, erasing as much as they recorded. Phones were confiscated. Security cameras, discreetly hidden in hall corners, were stripped of their footage. The police report drafted later would call it a business dispute that escalated into violence. Walid and Farid would be listed by name, their deaths framed as a tragic quarrel between longtime partners. Gemma Velasco was mentioned only once in an internal memo, then removed before the official statement reached the press. In the story told to the world, she had never existed. The scandal could have consumed the city, but Dubai knew how to bury its truths beneath glass facades and polished headlines. By the next morning, newspapers printed carefully worded condolences, their photographs of Walid cropped from old conferences and ribbon cuttings. Farid's body was flown quietly to Sharjah for burial. The penthouse was scrubbed, its marble restored to a shine that revealed nothing of what had been spilled there. By the end of the week, the chandelier had been replaced, and the building's lobby resumed its quiet hum of businessmen and tourists. Gemma's daughter was left with no inheritance, no recognition. Her father was a name whispered in boardrooms, her mother erased from records. She became, in the eyes of the city, a child without lineage, a shadow walking among towers built by a man who never allowed her to exist. She would grow up asking questions that no one dared answer, her identity a ghost story told only in private. As for Sheikha Hanifa, she appeared in public only days later. Draped in dark silks, her posture regal, she stood at a charity gala and thanked donors for their generosity. Her voice did not falter. Her expression did not betray grief or triumph. She spoke of education, of hope for children, of resilience in difficult times. Not once did she utter Gemma's name, nor acknowledge the life her husband had lived in secret. For the world watching, she remained the image of composure, untouched by the chaos that had devoured her household. And so the city moved on. Towers continued to rise, each one gleaming like a mirror that refused to show cracks. But beneath the shine lingered questions that no cover story could erase. Was Gemma a victim of circumstance, or a woman who reached too high into a world that could never claim her? Did Walid love her, or did he only love the reflection of himself she carried in her devotion? Was Farid seeking justice when he exposed the secret, or only feeding his greed? In the end, who truly killed whom? The bullets that tore through bodies, or the lies that poisoned their lives long before that night? These questions remain, floating above the silence of the penthouse where blood once mirrored the skyline. They cannot be polished away by janitors or rewritten by officials. They remain in the spaces between headlines, in the whispers of those who knew, in the memory of a woman who once demanded not money, not gifts, but a name. If this story shocked you, unsettled you, or made you question what power and love really mean when draped in gold, subscribe for more true crime breakdowns. And tell us in the comments, was this justice or a cover-up? Was Gemma erased as punishment for daring to be seen, or as collateral in a city that buries its scandals beneath glass towers?